On a cold October night, Amir sat cross-legged inside the crumbling walls of his grandfather's abandoned house. Dust floated like pale spirits in the moonlight that slipped through the broken roof, and the silence was so deep it seemed alive. He had been warned since childhood that no one should spend a night here alone. The villagers whispered that this house was cursed, for Amir's grandfather had once practiced a dangerous ritual known as the Shanshe Jinnat Chila, an invocation said to summon beings from another world. Most people laughed it off as an old folk tale, but Amir wanted to know the truth. He lit a single candle and placed it on the dirt floor. Around him lay the remnants of strange chalk markings his grandfather had once carved, faded but still recognizable. With shaky hands, Amir copied the patterns using fresh chalk and muttered the words he found in an old leather journal. At first, nothing happened. The night outside remained quiet, and he almost felt foolish. But then the air thickened, as though invisible hands were pressing against his chest. The candle flame elongated, stretching unnaturally tall before snapping back into a trembling flicker. Suddenly, he heard it, a faint rustling from the far corner of the room. Amir froze. There were no windows, no open doors, no way for the wind to enter, yet the sound grew louder, like dry leaves being dragged across the floor. He squinted through the dim light and saw the chalk circle darken, the lines sinking into the ground as though alive. His heart pounded. The journal hadn't mentioned this. A shadow began to rise, not cast from the candle, but standing independently, swelling and curling upward into a humanoid shape. Its edges bled into the walls, as if the house itself was reshaping to give it form. Amir wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. A voice slithered through the air, deep and layered with echoes, speaking his name with a familiarity that made his blood turn cold. The candle flickered violently, throwing monstrous shapes across the walls, and Amir realized he was no longer alone. Something ancient had heard his call, and it had answered. Amir could not breathe. His throat tightened as the shadow leaned closer, its shape twisting like smoke trying to take the form of something human. The candle burned low, but it was enough to reveal two glowing points where eyes should have been. They weren't just watching him, they were inside his head, reading his thoughts, pulling at his fears like threads. His grandfather's journal had warned that once the ritual began, breaking it would only enrage the presence. Yet every instinct screamed for him to run. The voice came again, layered, vibrating through the cracked walls. You called us. You must finish what was started. Amir's hands trembled as he flipped through the brittle pages of the journal, desperately searching for what came next. But some of the ink had faded with age, leaving only fragments of instructions. He could make out a single line: the offering must not be refused. His heart dropped. He had no idea what the offering was supposed to be. A sudden knock echoed through the empty house. Not from the door, but from inside the walls. Amir's blood ran cold as the knocking moved around him, one moment on his left, then above, then right behind him. The candle guttered, shadows swelling larger until the figure towered over him. Its whisper became clearer: he knew the price, your blood carries his debt. Amir's mind raced. His grandfather had died mysteriously, found alone in this same house decades ago. No one had ever spoken of how, but the villagers often said the Jinn had taken him. Was this what they meant? Had his grandfather bound his bloodline to this ritual, leaving Amir as the next payment? The figure stretched, its form bending unnaturally, as if its body had no bones. Long, claw-like fingers slid across the dirt, tracing the chalk lines Amir had drawn. Wherever its touch passed, the chalk ignited with a dull, red glow. A wind rose from nowhere, swirling inside the room, carrying with it a sickly stench of rot and burned metal. The journal slipped from Amir's hands, its pages scattering across the floor, but one page stuck to the glowing lines, catching fire. Through the haze, Amir read one last phrase before the page turned to ash: the circle must never be broken. Panic surged through him as he noticed the chalk line nearest to him had smudged when he first sat down. A small gap. Barely the size of a fingertip. The entity's eyes flicked to that broken part of the circle, and Amir realized too late that he had given it an opening. The shadow leaned forward, its face now inches from his. The voice, sharper and more human this time, rasped, "You are mine now." The candle went out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. When Amir's eyes adjusted to the blackness, he realized the silence was gone. The house was breathing. Every creak of wood sounded like lungs expanding, every sigh of wind through the cracks like an exhale. He could not see the shadow anymore, but he could feel it, so close that the air tasted metallic, like blood on his tongue. He stumbled backward, reaching for the door, but his hand only brushed a cold, damp wall. The doorway he had entered through was gone. The house had sealed itself. Panic throbbed in his chest. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark but revealed nothing comforting. The walls seemed stretched, warped, as if the house had shifted into something alive and twisted. His grandfather's chalk markings now pulsed faintly in the dirt, spreading like veins. Amir's phone buzzed unexpectedly. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the screen. It was an incoming call. But the number wasn't one he recognized. It was his own. His shaking thumb slid across the screen. He raised it to his ear, and the sound that came through was unbearable. A distorted voice, heavy with static, whispering in rhythm with his heartbeat, "You broke the circle. Now you walk with us." The phone grew hot in his hand until he dropped it. The screen shattered, and the beam of light died. From the dark, faint footsteps began circling him. Not hurried, but deliberate, as though something invisible was pacing just beyond his reach. He pressed his back against the wall and tried to control his breathing, but the footsteps multiplied. First 2, then 4, then dozens of them, surrounding him from every direction. He knew then that he had not summoned one being, he had opened a passage. The sound of children laughing echoed faintly, high-pitched and wrong, bouncing off the walls. Amir's chest tightened as memories of his childhood resurfaced, stories his mother had told him of shadows that played with lost children, luring them away into the forests at night. His grandfather had always silenced her, his face pale whenever she mentioned it. Now Amir understood. They weren't stories. They were warnings. Something brushed his arm, cold and damp, like fingers dragging across his skin. He jerked away, but the touch returned, this time on his neck, his shoulder, his ankle. He swatted at the air, but there was nothing to see. The whispers grew louder, layered voices speaking his name in unison, mocking him, welcoming him. Suddenly, a dim glow appeared in the center of the room. The chalk circle reignited, brighter than before, but the shape was no longer a circle. The lines twisted into a jagged spiral, drawing inward like a vortex. Amir's body began to tremble as he felt himself being pulled, not physically, but something deeper, as if his very spirit was being dragged toward that spiral. His grandfather's voice rang suddenly in his memory, words once dismissed as madness: "If they mark you, they will follow you home." And Amir realized with dread that the night was only the beginning. Amir burst forward blindly, his body colliding with the warped wooden wall. He clawed at the planks until splinters dug deep into his fingers, desperate for an exit. For a moment, the spiral's pull weakened, and with sheer panic driving him, he shoved against the boards. Suddenly, the wall cracked open like brittle glass, and he stumbled into the night. Cold air hit his face. He gasped, relieved to see the pale glow of the moon overhead and the outline of trees in the distance. The old house loomed behind him, silent now, as if nothing had happened. For a fleeting second, Amir almost convinced himself it had been a hallucination. But when he looked down at his hands, his veins glowed faintly red, tracing the same jagged spiral he had seen on the dirt floor. He ran. Through the trees, through the dry grass, until his lungs burned. Finally, he saw the lights of the village flickering ahead. The familiar sound of barking dogs, distant voices, and the faint call to prayer grounded him. Yet even in the safety of human life, he felt them. The whispers followed, brushing the back of his neck like invisible breath. Amir staggered into his family's courtyard. His mother rushed to him, her face etched with worry. "Where were you? Why do you look like this?" she asked, clutching his arm. He wanted to explain, but the words lodged in his throat. The moment her fingers touched his skin, she recoiled as though burned. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "What did you do?" Before he could answer, the courtyard lanterns flickered violently. A chill spread through the air, and the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the walls. The dogs outside whined and howled. His younger sister, standing in the doorway, pointed toward him with trembling hands. "Amir," she said softly, "they came with you." His blood froze. He spun around, but there was nothing visible. Yet every corner of the yard carried movement, shapes that didn't belong to the light, darting too fast for human eyes. The whispers rose again, louder this time, filling his ears until his skull ached. His sister screamed, and in that instant, Amir saw what she was seeing. For a split second, the Jinn revealed themselves, faces without features, bodies like black smoke, teeth that were not teeth but shards of endless mouths, all circling him. Amir's mother dragged his sister inside and slammed the door. He was left standing alone in the yard, the shadows tightening around him. He remembered the journal's warning, the circle must never be broken. But it already was. Now, wherever he went, the circle traveled with him. A low laugh echoed from every direction, the same voice layered into dozens. "You cannot leave us, Amir. You are the path." The night grew colder, and Amir realized with horror that escape was no longer possible. The Jinn were bound to him, and his home was no longer his own. Amir did not sleep that night. The whispers circled his bed like vultures, sometimes soft, sometimes deafening, always reminding him that he was theirs. By morning, his eyes were bloodshot, his body weak. His mother refused to come near him, muttering prayers under her breath, while his sister wouldn't even step into the same room. The house felt colder than ever, even in daylight. Amir knew he couldn't survive another night like this. He needed help. The villagers spoke of a man who lived beyond the fields, a reclusive healer named Pir Qasim. Some said he was mad, others swore he had faced creatures worse than Jinn. Desperation left Amir with no choice. He walked for hours until he found the old mud house leaning against the edge of the forest. The smell of incense seeped from its doorway, and strange charms hung from the walls. Pir Qasim greeted him before Amir even knocked. His eyes were clouded white, but Amir felt as though the man saw straight through him. "Your grandfather's shadow walks behind you," the healer rasped. "I warned him once, and he did not listen. Now you suffer his debt." Amir's knees weakened. "Tell me how to stop this. Please." The old man gestured for him to sit. He scattered black seeds across the floor, whispering verses in a low chant. The seeds shifted unnaturally, forming the same spiral Amir had seen in the cursed house. Pir Qasim's face darkened. "They are bound. Not to the house, not to your grandfather anymore, but to you. Wherever you go, they will follow. Banishing them is possible, but the price," he trailed off. "What price?" Amir demanded. The healer's cloudy eyes flicked toward him. "A life for a life. They require blood. Yours, or another's. Only then will the circle close." Amir's stomach lurched. Sacrifice. That was the offering the journal had meant. His grandfather had avoided it, passing the curse down instead. Rage boiled in Amir's chest. He wanted to scream at the injustice, but the whispers in his ear drowned his thoughts, mocking him. "Choose, Amir. Choose." Pir Qasim pressed a talisman into his palm, a small iron pendant inscribed with verses. "This will weaken them, but not forever. You must decide before the next moon. Either you give them what they demand, or they will take it themselves, from your blood, from your family." The room grew heavy, the shadows thickening even under the oil lamp's light. Amir swore he saw the outline of faces pressing against the walls, waiting. He clutched the talisman tight, the metal burning into his skin. He left the healer's house with more fear than hope. The village looked ordinary as he returned, children playing in the dust, men calling to one another in the fields. But everywhere Amir looked, the shadows lingered a little too long, watching, waiting. That night, as he sat alone in his room, the whispers no longer mocked him. They coaxed him, soft and seductive, "You don't have to die, Amir. Someone else can pay. Just choose." Amir sat in the darkness of his room, the iron talisman heavy in his palm, its heat pulsing like a heartbeat. Every shadow stretched unnaturally across the walls, whispering promises in voices that were not his own. He could not eat, could not think of anything but the words Pir Qasim had spoken, a life for a life. The offering must not be refused. His grandfather had chosen silence, and now Amir bore the burden. By midnight, the air turned colder. His breath came out in pale fog, though no window was open. The whispers grew into chants, all urging the same demand, choose. They reminded him of his mother's fearful eyes, his sister's scream, the way the dogs had howled when he returned home. The Jinn made it clear, if he did nothing, they would claim his family. Tears stung his eyes. The thought of harming anyone he loved was unbearable. He gripped the talisman tighter, praying for strength, but it only burned hotter, as if mocking his hesitation. The spiral marks on his arms glowed faintly beneath his skin, spreading further each hour. He felt weaker, as though pieces of him were already being pulled away. In a haze of desperation, Amir left the house and wandered into the forest. The night was eerily quiet, the trees towering like black sentinels. He dropped to his knees in the clearing where the moonlight broke through. "Take me," he whispered hoarsely. "Take my life, but leave them alone." For a moment, silence answered him. Then the wind picked up, violent and sharp, carrying with it the stench of rot. Shadows poured across the clearing, writhing like snakes, encircling him. The whispers roared in unison, deafening, yet their meaning was clear: "We will not take what is freely given. You must offer." Amir's chest clenched. They wouldn't let him sacrifice himself easily. They wanted a choice, a betrayal, a stain of guilt that would last beyond death. Rage and despair collided inside him. He screamed into the night, the sound breaking his voice. "Then take me anyway." The spiral on his arms flared bright red, searing through his flesh. He collapsed, writhing, as the shadows pressed closer. His vision blurred, and he felt the world slipping away. But through the agony, he held the talisman to his chest and began to pray, every verse he remembered spilling from his lips in a trembling chant. The air shifted. The shadows recoiled slightly, writhing as though burned by the words. For the first time, the whispers faltered. Amir forced the verses louder, his body shaking violently, the talisman glowing white-hot in his hand. A piercing scream erupted from the forest, not human, but ancient, filled with fury. Then, silence. The spiral marks on his arms faded into scars, the whispers vanished, and the cold lifted. Amir collapsed face first into the dirt, gasping for air. When he finally lifted his head, the clearing was empty. The Jinn were gone. But deep inside, he knew the truth. They hadn't been destroyed. Only driven back. Banished for now. The price had not been paid. One day, when the circle weakened again, they would return. And when they did, someone else in his bloodline would have to choose.